Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The sun, once a symbol of life and warmth, was now humanity's greatest threat. It was dying, collapsing inward, and soon it would explode into a supernova. The scientists had been clear, there was no stopping it. No technology, no human invention could halt the natural catastrophe that loomed over the solar system. And when it happened, the Earth, along with everything that humanity had ever known, would be obliterated in a blinding burst of cosmic fury. Yet, amidst the dread and despair, a flicker of hope remained. Project Exodus. The migration ships, massive vessels designed to carry millions of people across the stars, offered the last chance for survival. And at the center of it all stood President Nathaniel Hayes, the man tasked with leading humanity through its darkest hour. Hayes stood on the balcony of his private quarters aboard Elysium, the flagship of the migration fleet. His eyes, pale and tired, gazed at the distant sun, now swollen and angry, its orange and red hues swirling in an endless inferno. Even from this distance, the sight was haunting. Beautiful, in a way. A dying star, burning itself out in one final act of defiance. He sighed, the weight of the universe resting on his shoulders. In a matter of days, they would leave the solar system. Beyond the asteroid belt lay the radiation zone, a deadly region that had claimed the lives of every probe that dared to enter it. Autopilot systems had proven useless. A human navigator was needed, someone with the experience and intuition to guide the fleet through the chaos, and that someone was him. The decision hadn't been easy, but it had been inevitable. No one else could do it, not with the stakes this high. Nathaniel had volunteered without hesitation, knowing full well what it meant. The radiation would kill him, slowly at first, then all at once. But if it meant saving the rest of humanity, if it meant ensuring that his daughter Evelyn and millions of others would survive to see the new world, then it was a price worth paying. He closed his eyes, letting the silence of space wash over him. For the first time in months, the constant hum of meetings, decisions, and crisis management was absent. Here, in these last few moments of solitude, he could reflect on what was to come. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. Hayes didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Nathan, a voice called gently. It was Admiral Garrett, his closest friend and advisor. They had been through countless wars together, fought battles no one else could understand. Garrett, ever the practical one, had disagreed with Hayes's decision to become the navigator. But even he couldn't change the president's mind. Hayes turned, offering a weary smile. "How long do we have?" Garrett stepped forward, his expression grim. 2 days. The fleet is ready. We'll depart on your command. Hayes nodded, glancing once more at the dying sun. And the people? Are they prepared? Garrett hesitated. As much as they can be. They know what's coming, Nathan. But the fear, it's everywhere. They look to you for guidance. I'll address them tonight, Hayes said, his voice steady. They need to hear it from me. The truth. No more sugarcoating. Garrett's face softened, his usual military stoicism giving way to something more personal. Are you sure about this? There's still time to reconsider. We could find someone else. No, Hayes replied firmly. It has to be me. People need to see that I'm with them, that I'm willing to sacrifice just as much as they are. Maybe more. The Admiral sighed, knowing there was no point in arguing. Evelyn asked about you. A sharp pang of emotion struck Hayes, but he pushed it aside. How is she? Scared, Garrett admitted. She's strong, though. just like her father. Hayes looked down at his hands, already trembling slightly, a result of the stress, or perhaps the early effects of radiation exposure. He wasn't sure anymore. "I'll see her before we go. I'll make sure she knows everything." Garrett nodded, stepping back toward the door. "We'll be ready, Nathan. Whatever you need." After Garrett left, the room seemed colder, emptier. Hayes leaned against the railing, his breath steady but shallow. He had always known leadership came with sacrifice. But this was more than he had ever imagined. He thought of Evelyn, of her future. She had been just a child when he took office. Now, she was a young woman, stronger and braver than he could have hoped. She would survive. She had to. Later that evening, Hayes stood before the cameras in the command center, his image broadcast to every ship in the fleet. His suit, crisp and dignified, did little to hide the exhaustion in his face. He had aged in these past months, the stress of an entire species resting on him. The cameras went live. "Citizens of Earth," he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his message. "As you know, we are approaching the most dangerous phase of our journey. The radiation belt ahead is impassable by automated systems. We've tried. We've failed. Only a human mind can navigate through the chaos. And that's why I've made the decision to personally guide us through." The reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, and fear. The president, their symbol of hope, would sacrifice himself for them. He could see it in their eyes, the same question in every gaze: "Why you?" He continued, addressing that very question. "I made this decision because I believe it's the right thing to do. Leadership means sacrifice, and no one is above that. Not even me. I've chosen this path because it's what humanity needs. You need to know that I'm with you, every step of the way, and that I'll do everything in my power to make sure we all reach the new world." His voice softened, carrying the weight of finality. "We are on the verge of a new beginning. A world of hope, of opportunity. And I will guide you there, no matter the cost." The speech ended, but the ripple it caused would linger long after the broadcast was over. Hayes knew the world was watching, listening, and now, waiting. When he returned to his quarters, he found Evelyn waiting for him. She was seated in the dim light, her hands clasped tightly together. She had always been strong, but tonight, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Dad," she said softly, standing as he entered. "You can't do this." He moved toward her, his face stern but his heart breaking. "Evelyn, it has to be me. There's no other way." "There has to be," she protested, her voice trembling. "You can't leave me like this." "You can't." Her voice cracked, and she struggled to hold back her emotions. Hayes took her hands, his grip firm but gentle. "I have to do this. For you. For all of us. You'll survive, Evelyn. You'll live on that new world, and you'll build something better than what we've left behind." She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "But not without you." Hayes pulled her into a hug, holding her as tightly as he could. "I'll always be with you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter where you go, I'll be there. In your heart." They stood like that for a long time, father and daughter, clinging to the last moments they would ever share. Hayes wished he could stay longer, wished he could be there to see her grow, to see the new world flourish. But he knew that his time was running out. When they finally parted, Evelyn wiped her eyes and looked up at him, her voice steady once more. "Promise me you'll come back." Hayes didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he smiled softly and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Evelyn. Always remember that." And with that, he left, the door sliding shut behind him, leaving his daughter in the stillness of the room. As the door slid shut behind him, Nathaniel Hayes took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the final moments with his daughter pressing down on him. There was no turning back now, no time for second thoughts. The fate of humanity depended on his ability to navigate the fleet through the lethal radiation belt that lay ahead. His heart ached for Evelyn, for the life he would miss, but he pushed those emotions deep down. He had to focus on the mission. In the command center, the crew was already preparing for the final push. Admiral Garrett stood at the helm, directing teams of engineers and technicians as they ran last-minute diagnostics on the migration ships. When he saw Hayes enter, Garrett gave a curt nod, his usual stern expression softened by a flicker of respect and concern. "All systems are operational," Garrett reported. "The fleet is in position. We're waiting on your command." Hayes stepped up to the control panel, his fingers trembling slightly as he ran through the final checklist. He could feel the radiation already starting to affect him, subtle at first, like the beginnings of a fever. But it would get worse. Much worse. "Let's get started," he said, his voice firm despite the growing unease in his chest. The engines of the massive ships roared to life, their deep hum vibrating through the entire vessel. Outside, the stars shimmered like distant diamonds, and the cold vacuum of space seemed almost tranquil. But Hayes knew better. The radiation belt ahead was an invisible storm, waiting to tear apart anything that dared to pass through it. He took his place in the navigator's pod, a small, isolated chamber filled with holographic displays and controls. It was here that he would manually guide the fleet through the deadly zone. As the door sealed behind him, the isolation felt suffocating. The thick glass of the pod separated him from the rest of the crew, from the world he had known. He was alone now, facing death head-on. The fleet moved forward, and the edge of the radiation zone loomed closer on the holographic display. Hayes's heart pounded as the first wave of radiation hit the shields, causing a soft hum to resonate through the ship. He could see the readings spike, the levels climbing rapidly. "Radiation levels are increasing," Garrett's voice came through the comms, calm but laced with tension. "Shields are holding, for now. Keep the formation tight," Hayes instructed. "We need to minimize exposure. If any ship breaks off, it won't make it through." The controls responded to his touch with precision, but Hayes knew this wasn't just a matter of steering the ships. The radiation was erratic, unpredictable. Automated systems couldn't adapt fast enough. It required instinct, intuition, something only a human could provide. His vision blurred for a moment, and Hayes blinked hard, trying to clear the fog from his eyes. The radiation was already starting to take its toll on his body. His skin prickled with heat, and his muscles ached, but he gritted his teeth and focused on the task at hand. The fleet pushed deeper into the radiation belt, and the hum of the shields grew louder, more insistent. Sparks flickered across the displays as the protective systems strained to keep the deadly waves at bay. Hayes guided the ships with careful precision, adjusting course by mere fractions of a degree to avoid the worst of the radiation pockets. The hours dragged on, each moment filled with tension. Sweat poured down Hayes's face, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could feel his body weakening, his movements becoming sluggish. But he couldn't stop. Not now. "How are we holding up?" he asked through gritted teeth, his voice strained. "Shields are at 60%, Garrett replied. "We've sustained minor damage to the outer hulls, but nothing critical so far. We're about halfway through." halfway. It felt like an eternity already, and the worst was yet to come. Hayes's fingers trembled as he adjusted the course again, narrowly avoiding a surge of radiation that would have overwhelmed the fleet's defenses. His vision blurred again, this time accompanied by a sharp pain in his chest. He coughed, and a trickle of blood escaped his lips, staining his sleeve as he wiped it away. The radiation was eating away at him, faster than he had anticipated. He had known this would happen, had prepared for it. But knowing and experiencing were two different things. "Admiral," he rasped into the comms, "if I don't make it, don't," Garrett interrupted, his voice firm. "You're going to make it. Focus on getting us through. That's all that matters." Hayes swallowed hard, nodding to himself. Garrett was right. He couldn't think about what came after, couldn't allow himself to dwell on his own mortality. Not yet. The ship jolted violently, and alarms blared throughout the control room. Hayes's eyes darted to the displays, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the cause, a massive radiation storm, larger than anything they had encountered so far, was sweeping toward the fleet. "Brace for impact," Hayes shouted, gripping the controls tightly. The wave hit them with the force of a hurricane. The shields flared bright, struggling to hold, and the entire ship shuddered as the radiation tore at it. Hayes's body screamed in pain, every nerve on fire as the radiation surged through him. His vision dimmed, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness, but he held on. He had to. With a final, desperate push, he adjusted the course, steering the fleet out of the direct path of the storm. The ship's systems groaned in protest, but the shields held, just barely. "Damage report," Hayes gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "We're still intact," Garrett replied, though his voice was tight with strain. "But the shields are down to 30%. We can't take another hit like that." Hayes nodded weakly, his hands trembling as they hovered over the controls. His body was failing, the radiation poisoning advancing rapidly. He could feel it in every breath, in every movement. Time was running out. "We're close," he whispered to himself, trying to summon the last reserves of his strength. "Just a little further." The fleet moved through the final stretch of the radiation belt, the ships holding together by sheer willpower. Hayes's vision was nearly gone now, his body racked with pain. He could barely make out the displays in front of him, the colors and shapes blending into a blur of light, but he knew they were close. He could feel it, and then, after what felt like an eternity, the readings shifted. The radiation levels began to drop, slowly at first, then faster. The worst was behind them. "We're through," Garrett's voice crackled through the comms, filled with disbelief and relief. "We made it." A wave of emotion washed over Hayes, relief, pride, exhaustion. He had done it. He had saved them, but he wouldn't see the new world. His hands slipped from the controls, his body too weak to hold on any longer. The pain, the burning, the heaviness in his chest, it all seemed to fade as a sense of calm washed over him. He had done his duty. As the darkness closed in, Hayes allowed himself one final thought. Evelyn. He could see her face, hear her voice. She was safe now. That was all that mattered. With a quiet sigh, Nathaniel Hayes, President of Earth, navigator of the last hope of humanity, closed his eyes for the last time. The migration fleet moved forward, emerging from the radiation belt into the vastness of space. Behind them, the dying sun flickered its last, but ahead, a new dawn awaited. The ships glided silently through the void, carrying with them the future of the human race. On the surface of the planet they called Eden, Evelyn stood beneath the strange, alien sky, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what her father had done. The world around her was beautiful, filled with promise. But the price had been steep. She gazed up at the sky, tears welling in her eyes. She knew her father was gone, but his legacy would live on in this new world. And she would make sure it was one worth living in.